Just a completely serious safety warning for this video. In about 43 minutes, there's going to be about 20-ish seconds of footage of a crazy furry rave with strobe lights and flashing imagery. And if you are photosensitive or epileptic or otherwise vulnerable to harm from such images, there's going to be a visual and audio warning to skip about a minute further ahead into the video from that point. Now, as to why there is footage of a furry rave in a video about autism, I mean, do I have to explain everything? Hi, I'm Super Train Station H and welcome to part 11 of Barrier Aggression, my analysis of select material from Autism Confidential, the National Council on Severe Autism's podcast series. My critical breakdown mostly focuses on episode 39, where NCSA President Jill Escher led a massive public indignation meeting about a news article covering clinically diagnosed autistic doctors who are facing workplace discrimination due to their disability backgrounds, while also discussing other issues they faced as disabled people unrelated to societal backlash. As the leader of an autism advocacy nonprofit that focuses on advancing the prospects of autistic people who aren't able to attempt careers such as medicine, it's apparently Jill's job to also speak out against autistic people who can't attempt to do those things. Oh wait, that's not her job, it's just her unhinged personal crusade to punish and ridicule autistic people who could do things her own autistic children can't. Jill, I sincerely believe you've been traumatized by the indescribable suffering and difficulties of your children, and that you're coping with that in the most destructive manner possible. That's not an insult. That's the most empathetic thing I can possibly say about you. You need help. The time has really come for you, Jill, to detach yourself from the fantasy that you're a hero to autistic people, and realize that you've put the credibility of yourself and of your organization in a position of jeopardy unprecedented within the modern sphere of disability discourse. Anyway, in my last video, I discussed how NCSA board member and director of the Neurobehavioral Unit of Kennedy Krieger Institute, Lee Wachtel, has a problem where she can't stop making shit up about autistic people other than those who might qualify for treatment in her unit, which she insists only deals with severe autism. Given Lee's aversion to acknowledging the clinical legitimacy of what might be called non-severe autism, the fact that she calls her own patient severely autistic is incongruous and a perplexing state of affairs to say the least, especially when she not only keeps describing clinically diagnosed autistic people as being self-diagnosed and self-adopting autism as a fantasy identity option, but also seems to think of high-functioning autism and autistic self-advocacy as a bespoke political party with an official agenda to discredit and erase autistic people with the highest support needs, who Lee says they despise in a manner comparable to anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I think at some point some form of reason has to prevail. I think that we're stuck in the United States with skewing reality for a lot of fantasy on many levels, and at some point that needs to stop. Particularly when it comes to it's just the whole thing of fighting for equality, equity, and equal rights for everybody. It's I always say, you cannot fight for racial equity and spout anti-Semitism at the same time. That's incongruous, and if you act like that, you're just a hypocrite. And I think it's the same thing when you're advocating for rights for people with disability. If you want to advocate for yourself as somebody with high-functioning autism, at the end of the day, you're just a hypocrite and just as bad as anybody else who has discriminated against people with disability, if you're writing out of the equation those who are the most severely afflicted.
What you're saying isn't real.
Lee, I really don't know how to feel about that absurdly ugly statement, when considering that Lee has a doctor pal who actually lives in the state of Israel. Legit, I don't know how the fuck I'm supposed to feel about that. I can't say whether or not it's offensive, And I can't say that if it was offensive, whether or not I even had the right to actually be offended by it, but I certainly do find it fucking uncomfortable and disturbing. Dr. Jenny Goldstein has a text-only cameo appearance as a co-star in episode 32 of Autism Confidential, the official NCSA podcast, which was supposed to be a discussion by Lee about an administrative terminology proposal made by the Lancet Commission in 2021 dealing with autistics with the highest support needs, aka the relatively lower functioning as some might describe them. But given that this was Lee, it naturally veered off instead into a propaganda session to discredit the legitimacy of relatively higher functioning autism. Anyway, getting back to Dr. Goldstein, not only is she a doctor, but she's the parent of an autistic child. Of course, neither being a doctor nor the outspoken parent of a high support needs autistic child are bad things, but the fact that Dr. Goldstein not only happens to be discrediting the validity of autistic people other than her son, and is also disrespecting those people's validity as even being adults, well, all that just serves to make Dr. Goldstein an autism attack doctor and an autism attack mom, both of which, in my opinion, are bad things. Let's see what they have to say. I have no idea.
I always have to laugh at some of these comments, such as the neurodiversity claim that we should always presume competence. This is a quote from one of my colleagues in Israel who has a autistic son, who I will state is probably one of the most delightful individuals that you could ever possibly hope to meet, a true gift to his family, his community, and to society at large. But Jenny's response to this was, "My son Yehuda would really like to be a pilot. Neither El Al nor the Israeli Defense Forces are giving him a plane. But if they did, would you like to be a passenger on his aircraft?" Kind of, i.e., are you really willing to put your money where your mouth is?
I can't comment on the unique challenges and capabilities faced by this specific autistic person, but what I can comment on is that these two doctors are misrepresenting the concept of presuming competence in a way that makes that basic principle of respect for disabled people seem life-threateningly and absurdly dangerous. For doctors that specialize in disability, that's a tad concerning in my opinion.
You're not off to a real good start.
This was an article that just recently appeared in the time between the lecture in the University of Iowa, which we all kind of got a chuckle out of.
Oh, you got a chuckle out of it, huh, Lee? You thought it was some real fucking funny shit, huh? Let's read some real fucking funny shit from this hilarious, ridiculous article so we can laugh at it some more and share in what you find so fucking amusing. A doctor approached Javed after her televised appearance on the BBC. The doctor had recently received an autism diagnosis and was struggling to come to terms with it. They said that they felt internally or permanently broken, she says, but hearing my diagnosis, it gave them confidence and courage that they are possibilities. Yeah, real fucking funny, huh, Lee? Fuck you.
Fuck you!
Fuck you!
You want to know what's really funny, Lee? The fact that the NCSA did an entire podcast about this Spectrum News article about autistic doctors, yet the podcast host and organization president Jill Escher only read the first 9% of the article specifically so she could misrepresent its contents by not letting her audience find out that these clinically diagnosed disabled people actually faced difficulties and weren't privileged crybabies that self-proclaimed autism so that they could complain about nothing. You know what else is really funny? Real fucking funny? The fact that the best case for you, Lee, in terms of making you look as non-evil as possible, is that if it turned out that you never actually read this article. What the fuck was that? What? As if it turned out that you never actually read this article and are just making biased, sardonic responses based on your assumption of the article's contents purely from the headline. A best case scenario in which you chose to provide in-depth commentary on an article you never actually read yourself does not look good for you. Because if you did in fact do that, that's a major fucking oopsie on your behalf. But if it turns out that you did read the entire article and still went through with this shit in episode 32 and episode 39 of the NCSA podcast, you are indescribably fucked up in ways I won't even be covering yet because of how much bullshit I need to analyze from you and your stupid friends first.
This was an article that just recently appeared in the time between the lecture in the University of Iowa, which we all kind of got a chuckle out of. And this is from Spectrum News, where physicians, so MDs who've been through medical school, residency training, and all of that, who report that they have autism.
Lee's constant tone between episode 32 and episode 39, it just paints her as seeming incredibly unwilling to accept the fact that people with autism and other disabilities exist as students and instructors in high-level academic settings. Lee seems to be operating on the concept if they were truly autistic or disabled, they would obviously be on a waiting list for the type of care that Lee provides in her neurobehavioral unit, and couldn't possibly attempt higher education, let alone serve as professors or doctors. But that's just contrary to actual reality.
That would be in my line of work on the neurobehavioral unit over the 20 years that I've been in the field. Autism still represents individuals who are very impaired, the vast majority of whom have concomitant intellectual disability, minimal to no language, very significant comorbidities, whether those are psychiatric, medical, genetic, or combined, and who are going to require significant supports for the rest of their life, will never live independently, earn a living wage, run for office, drive a car, do any of those things, and certainly not attend university. They cannot make any type of decisions. Maybe they can choose between having a vanilla and a strawberry ice cream. They can't live independently. They're never going to be able to do any of those things that these other individuals, like physicians who claim they have autism, can do.
Yeah, I think Lee actually thinks that. Holy shit.
This was an article that just recently appeared in the time between the lecture in the University of Iowa, which we all kind of got a chuckle out of. And this is from Spectrum News, where physicians, so MDs who've been through medical school, residency training, and all of that, who report that they have autism.
Report that they have autism. I know, from first-hand experience in this context, saying that someone is reporting to have a disability is fungible with them saying that they are arbitrarily claiming to be disabled without any good faith legitimate basis in doing so. I know this firsthand because in 2014 a corrupt staff member at my college destroyed the diagnostic paperwork and documentation that had been on file at that school's Students with Disability Center since 2005 and replaced them with forged papers from my high school which stated that I had no clinically diagnosed impairments or disabilities. And that person then tried to argue that the college wasn't obligated to recognize or dispense services for my self-reported, self-proclaimed impairments. Being presented with falsified paperwork saying that my entire life going back to being diagnosed with multiple psychiatric, sensory, and motor conditions over the course of multiple days at a university in the very early 90s, being presented with doctored documents, how ironic, doctored documents, saying that my entire life was a lie that I had come up with to cheat. I disassociated so severely that it probably saved me from flipping out in the office as I was being confronted with these papers and being asked to explain myself. And honestly, preventing other people with autism and other disabilities from going through anything similar to that is my main motivation of doing these videos. And it's especially bad I it's always especially bad, but I only enrolled in this college because they promised to honor my documentation from public school and that wasn't as common for a private college to commit to doing back then as it might be nowadays, only for them to just steal my fucking money for almost a decade while accusing me of being a lazy student for failing classes I was knowledgeable enough about to write a fucking textbook for. Oh, and by the way, a tip for all you fucking counterfeiting shit suckers out there: the goal of counterfeiting is to make a fake version of something real. If you were an evil shithead who wanted to, for example, create counterfeit United States currency, you could attempt to do so, however foolish that may be, by creating a fake $20 Federal Reserve note. A fake $20 Federal Reserve note is a fake version of a real $20 Federal Reserve note. If you want to fail at counterfeiting US currency, the perfect way to do that would be to create a fake $25 bill. A fake $25 bill is a fake version of something which would have never existed in the first place and has no authentic equivalent. You can't fuck up more as a counterfeiter more severely than getting caught creating a fake version of something that couldn't have possibly been real to start with. And likewise, if you're a corrupt college employee wanting to discredit the diagnosis of a disabled person, you do not create papers from their high school which supposedly are official documentation of the student in question having self-diagnosed themselves with disabilities. You see, regardless of any argument for or against self-diagnosis, self-diagnosis demands the absence of official paperwork. High schools do not issue self-diagnosis paperwork for students that they then transfer to the colleges they attend after getting their high school diploma. Nothing could possibly make you look more fucking stupid than creating a counterfeit version of a document that would have never existed to begin with. And that's why you not only failed to stop me from getting my disability services, but you nearly caused the college you used to work for to get fucking sued by me. And either way, you still successfully aided in a system that made me spend more than twice the money and twice the time on a bachelor's degree that a non-disabled student would be asked to spend for that same degree, when I otherwise was described by my professors as a straight-A student, only to be treated like a goof-off by the administration when my talents weren't obvious in a way that the system was designed to recognize as being more advanced than that of a typical student in the subjects I was made to seem like I was functionally incompetent in, but understood at an adult level before I even turned 10. And all that is in the context of this particular college being one of the few that would accept students without an SAT score, which attracted a lot of disabled students of various descriptions who were capable of a college-level course of study, but whose capability and intelligence was not reflected by the way the SAT was structured back then. Anyway, if I seem personally offended by Dr. Wachtel and Dr. Arvizu repeatedly responding to an article specifically about clinically diagnosed autistic people by criticizing them for allegedly self-diagnosing with autism, as though these doctors merely saying that negated the fact of those people's actual formal diagnosis by their own doctors, my college experience of having gone through exactly that was the reason why. Now, to be clear, any argument for or against the concept of self-diagnosis of autism, or any judgment as to the sincerity or veracity of such, is completely irrelevant here. The reasonable interpretation of the situation at hand right now is that Lee is talking about the clinically diagnosed autistic physicians in this article, in her words, reporting autism, as though to cast doubt on the credibility of their disability status and intentions, which for someone who specializes in childhood disability at a hospital focused on that is, well, it's just a bit odd in my personal opinion.
The time between the lecture in the University of Iowa, which we all got a chuckle out of, and this is from Spectrum News, where physicians, so MDs who've been through medical school, residency training, and all of that, who report that they have autism.
For what may be the fourth time in this single part of my series alone, I want to remind everyone that the article specifically deals with people who are explicitly explained to have been formerly diagnosed in a professional setting. But Lee won't let facts like that get in the way of directing ridicule towards disabled strangers.
Yeah, I think like at some point, some form of like reason has to prevail. I think that we're stuck in the United States with like eschewing reality for a lot of fantasy on many levels, and at some point that like needs to stop.
Lee's right. It does need to stop, but thanks to her, it never will. Anyway,
In the time between the lecture in the University of Iowa, which we all got a chuckle out of, and this is from Spectrum News, where physicians, so MDs who've been through medical school, residency training, and all of that, who report that they have autism.
yes, Lee, that is what this article is about. Ignoring that condescending mention of reporting, it just happens to be the fact of the matter that she surely by accidentally explained the article without maliciously distorting it into an insidious hit piece that invalidates the struggles of autistic people like Lee's own patients. I mean, holy shit, Lee, are you okay? Are you possessed by an alien brain parasite sent by a son or something? We might need to hold you in a cell for 3 days to make sure you're clean.
Physicians, so MDs who've been through medical school, residency training, and all of that, who report that they have autism, speak out against the stigma that they experience in their daily lives. And it just, you just have to step back and ask yourselves, what similarities do they have, for example, with individuals like those on my unit and all the individuals who would meet that profound autism diagnosis?
Lee specializes in providing care and treatment for what she herself calls severe or profound autism cases. The very first person in the article she's so pissed about, Dr. Javed, goes out of her way to specifically describe herself in her own words as a higher functioning autistic person who is able to live independently but still has clinically documented significant difficulties in functioning that a non-disabled person by definition would not have. It's like if Lee specialized in treating stage 4 cancer patients and got mad because there was an article in a medical newspaper about stage 1 cancer patients. And if Lee insisted that the fact that she treats stage 4 cancer patients therefore proves that stage 1 cancer either doesn't exist or that the struggles faced by those patients aren't valid for recognition or discussion. Now, if anyone out there feels uncomfortable with me comparing autism to cancer, I do too. Not Lee, though.
Amongst a lot of professionals, I think that Carmen and I are probably a lot more willing than others to speak out and speak the truth. But many people are not because they don't want to be canceled. They don't want to get in trouble. And that just perpetuates, this situation ongoing. And you just can't really imagine like any situation elsewhere in medicine where, for example, like if you were an oncologist and wanted to work with, stage 4 like metastatic cancer, you would be like ostracized because you talked about it rather than preferring to work just with like stage 1, circumscribed cancerous presentations. Like you would probably be the opposite. You'd be like lauded for wanting to do this and for wanting to, work with and recognize and advance the research on and treatment options for people who are most like severely afflicted. But we find ourselves with autism to be in a very like opposite and perplexing state of affairs where there's such a fear.
For the sake of clarity and being more diplomatic about this than Lee could possibly deserve, I want to point out that she was comparing cancer to autism in the very specific context that Lee feels that she's stigmatized within the medical field for working with autistic people whose requirement for support compared to a non-disabled person is the most extreme. I have no motivation to doubt that Lee has actually experienced this, given the stigmatization of autism and disability in general. And in fact, it's probably the only thing she could say at this point that I would consider possibly trusting, if that's true, and she is facing some form of backlash for specializing in the care and treatment of autistic people she describes in her own words as severe cases. I'd go as far as to describe that as being obviously fucked up. But the path to fixing that isn't to treat high-functioning autistic people, as she might describe them, as an insurgent political movement of disability fraudsters who are seizing control of government committees as part of a conspiracy to marginalize and cancel low-functioning autistic people. And the specific committee I'm referring to is the IAC, which Lee's president, Jill Escher, in her words, it's stacked with high-functioning autistic people, during which Lee interjected and flat out said that the IAC committee members Jill was referring to weren't autistic at all.
And then you see marginalization, for example, on the IAC, which is the Federal Advisory Committee on Autism. It's heavily staffed by people who, quote unquote, have autism or represent autism, but really just those who are high functioning. Yeah.
Now, Lee, you were right for the most part, because less than 13% of that government committee's roster even described themselves as autistic, whether they were clinically diagnosed or not. This is the same committee that was supposedly stacked with a marginalizing cadre of fake autistic conspirators who were actively organizing against true autistic people, as Lee might call them.
And that does do a disservice to those who have, I guess, more classic or more true forms of autism.
If there is anyone conspiring against autistic people in any way, I somehow doubt it's the 8 people who describe themselves in their official bios as autistic out of the 64 members who were on the roster of the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee at the time you and your friends recorded that podcast. I bring this up again just to make it clear to any viewers who might be seeing this part 11 of my analysis of the shitty podcast episodes you were in as an introduction to my series, that there's essentially nothing Lee talked about within these podcasts that she deserves to be trusted on, because she just makes up fake shit to be mad about, specifically an online news article about clinically diagnosed high-functioning autistic people that has Lee so upset that she had to derail her own presentation about helping lower-functioning autistic people to denounce an article about high-functioning autistic people as a petty list of complaints from fake autistics.
Physicians, so MDs who've been through medical school, residency training, and all of that, who report that they have autism, speak out against the stigma that they experience in their daily lives. And you just have to step back and ask yourselves, what similarities do they have, for example, with individuals like those on my unit and all the individuals who would meet that profound autism diagnosis?
Lee, if you actually read that article, it means you've been extensively lying about the fundamental nature of its contents in ways that I refuse to cover at this point, because they'd be so fucking distracting that I couldn't cover anything else regarding the NCSA. As I mentioned earlier, the best case scenario for you, Lee, is that Jill lied to you by only reading the opening 9% of that article like she did in episode 39 of Autism Confidential, an episode entirely dedicated to that article, and you just decided to flagrantly debauch yourself by making an extensive rebuttal to an article you never read. So okay, Lee, let's hear what kind of chuckle you and your friends got out of this ridiculous article, according to you, which I hope for the sake of proving that your body contains a soul that you didn't actually read and that you're simply mocking the people in it based on the title alone, which is still fucked up. Alright, so let's hear it.
Physicians, so MDs who've been through medical school, residency training, and all of that, who report that they have autism, speak out against the stigma that they experience in their daily lives. And you just have to step back and ask yourselves, what similarities do they have, for example, with individuals like those on my unit and all the individuals who would meet that profound autism diagnosis? Jenny also had a comment to this article, again, she was just sort of blown away and had to kind of make a joke that these children are so similar to her son. Had to kind of make a joke that these children are so similar to her son.
Children? What fucking children? This is in response to an article about licensed doctors who are adults. What fucking children is Jenny referring to here?
You know what I say?
Said Edward.
Fuck the children. Fuck them. Fuck kids. They're getting entirely too much attention.
You cannot fucking win with these autism attack doctors and autism attack parents. They shame autistic adults as wrongfully appropriating the struggles of disabled children and assume that any person who's able to be visible enough to be seen in public or communicate with a non-disabled person in any form they consider normal, to prove that those people are too functional, too creative, too talented, and too intelligent to be autistic. But then, when it's time to belittle those same people and debunk their deservingness to be listened to, they refer to these same people as kids and children and assume parental levels of authority to tell other adults what they can and can't say about their own lived experiences of being disabled and what they can or can't do with their lives in terms of occupations. This is the same shit you saw with Amber, the autism attack mom from Buck Angel's podcast, who kept complaining about alleged kids that were falsely claiming autism on social media. When judging from the context, it's quite probable that at least some of the people she in one way or another encountered were over 18.
All these other kids, older kids, do this. Kids with autism, why it's such on a rise. Kids with Asperger's, all these kids on TikTok, and these kids could write on the internet. All of these kids who are like, oh, I'm neurodivergent because it's cool. You have kids who obviously don't even understand.
Do you think these kids have some form of autism that are doing this? Yeah. Because it also makes me so mad, Amber, that these kids are getting away with this stuff and nobody's pushing back on them. And like, where are the fucking adults? Where are they?
You fucking can!
I make that point as a brief aside, but I won't discuss Amber in excessive additional detail at this point. As for me, I didn't receive a ranked support needs level when I was diagnosed, because that wasn't how the diagnostic manual was structured at that time. But in terms of the 1 through 3 support level system, I'd probably consider myself in the range of level 1, the least intensive support needs. And that includes me needing to work for years with a therapist in grade school to suppress facial tics that interrupted my speech patterns. I also needed daily lessons on how to use my hands to dynamically manipulate objects in 3 dimensions so I could even begin to learn handwriting to an extent that somewhat let me function at my desk like a typical student, and that still involved physical pain and constant frustration. Aside from that, prolonged and complex full body movement stims always have and always will be part of my physical expression of imaginative thought, in the same way that it's a physical expression of happiness for a non-autistic person to smile. Now, I personally am extremely lucky that my habit of pacing in circles for hours while shaking objects in my caged fingers, especially toy trains, wasn't observed in a pathological context, because if I was put through the kind of bullshit therapy where I might be punished due to it not being typical behavior, I can't even say if I'd still be alive today. I'm very self-conscious about my stims in their more dramatic forms, and I would never film them to post to social media, but if I had, I'd stand a realistic chance of that footage being cut into so-called fake autism cringe and autism faking video compilations made by online vigilantes that Amber probably watched and that got her upset in the first place about supposed fake autistic people. Which leaves me in a perplexing state of affairs where, even if hypothetical, in Amber's case, she surely would have grouped me in with those so-called autism appropriating kids that were disrespecting the struggles of real autistic people like her son, in spite of the fact that I was diagnosed by a team of professionals at a university for displaying those exact characteristics before Amber's son was born and before Amber herself was born. Holy shit.
Physicians, so MDs who've been through medical school, residency training, and all of that, who report that they have autism, speak out against the stigma that they experience in their daily lives. And it just, you just have to step back and ask yourselves, what similarities do they have, for example, with individuals like those on my unit and all the individuals who would meet that profound autism diagnosis. Jenny also had a comment to this article, and again, she was just sort of blown away and had to kind of make a joke that these children are so similar to her son.
Yeah, so I think these autism attack moms, these autism attack doctors, they have this problem where they're so conditioned to relate to autistic people as those that they have authority over, that even when discussing autistic people they know to be adults, and even when they're criticizing them for supposedly claiming in bad faith to be autistic, they still feel justified in describing them as children. given the widespread attitudes in which non-disabled people treat disabled adults in a condescending or infantilizing manner, which is discussed later within the Spectrum News article the NCSA only read the first 9% of on their podcast, this is not something that makes Lee or Jenny look good as medical professionals, especially those who specialize in working with autistic people.
Sweetheart, you're not off to a real good start.
Only within the last year or so, we had an incident where a couple of therapists who work with autistic children went on social media accusing specifically named autistic adults of not being autistic on the basis that those adults don't closely resemble their own childhood age patients. Of course, ignoring the fact that the people they were casting accusations of disability fraud against were, to my knowledge, clinically diagnosed. I won't discuss them in detail since they've since then removed their claims from the internet, but it's something worth mentioning. I remember once in my college days I had an encounter with someone about my own age in a clinical setting who clearly assumed that they were going to be working in a strictly pediatric context with cute little kids the whole time and was visibly flustered to suddenly be faced with having to speak with and help me. It's kind of a problem in the medical field that people like these NCSA members and allies aren't helping.
You know, you just have to step back and ask yourselves, what similarities do they have, for example, with individuals like those on my unit and all the individuals who would meet that profound autism diagnosis. Jenny also had a comment to this article. Again, she was just sort of blown away and had to kind of make a joke that these children are so similar to her son, who had a conversation with his moose costume and then watched the Berenstain Bears before eating his 8th apple of the day.
I've sometimes seen criticism of autism parents, whether or not they are of the attack variety, on the basis that they excessively present their journey in raising their children as the defining characteristic of their own lives and personalities. For me personally, I think that parents sometimes can go overboard or become gratuitous in that sense, but I'm also not alone among autistic self-advocates in saying that it's also true that being the parent of a high support needs disabled child who may need lifelong supports and services and 24-hour care is going to define those parents' lives in a way that they can't help but characterize as reflecting a different experience of parenthood than most parents. And it's an experience of parenthood that they may feel needs to be better understood. I don't fault them for that. That being said, when autism attack parents use these experiences and struggles of their high support needs autistic children to not only shame people that they never even met for being visible within the autism community, but also use their children's struggles as a weapon to discourage ridicule towards disabled strangers whose deficit profiles and resulting support needs may be less extensive than their own children. It's really disgusting on their behalf, and it's intensely disrespectful to their children, whose unique experiences should be discussed in the context of improving services and supports catered to their needs, not for legitimizing the exclusion of unrelated people from being considered eligible for services and supports at all. This is another thing that we saw with Amber, and we saw it again right here in this NCSA podcast too.
They ran this article. Doctors with autism speak out against stigma. All right, so never mind the fact that neither of my children even understand what a doctor is. But, these doctors with autism. And here we are told.
I don't see a problem with some people identifying their differences or leaving themselves neurodivergent. It's fine. We all have our little quirks and our little differences, and that's fine. However, the use of the word autism, it's taken to the extremes because we need it for policymaking, for accessing services, for accessing education.
And the worst form of it that I see is when these autism attack parents use their children like decoy targets or shields for their arguments, where the parents frame their opinions such as that if anyone disagrees with the parents, it means that they're personally attacking their children, like in NCSA Podcast 13, where Jill went even further by calling the Autism Spectrum Disorder Level 1 diagnosis a violent absurdity against her own presumably ASD Level 3 children.
strong adaptive abilities, but have kind of social quirks are in the same category, the same diagnostic category as my kids who are nonverbal and function like at a preschool level.
And
like,
that's a problem.
It's absurd. It's not just a problem. I mean, it's violently absurd. I won't mention names, but there are those quote unquote autistic doctors. Of course, I don't see a speck of autism in these people, but whatever. Who have been antagonistic towards those who speak out on behalf of the severely affected. I'm saying that we're not treating them with dignity. We're not treating them with respect. We're disparaging them when all we're doing is communicating their reality. Like, it's inherently awful. Like their existence is inherently awful to these people.
Yeah, great. High functioning autism is a violent absurdity, huh, Jill? Yeah, that coming from the mouth of the president of an autism advocacy nonprofit definitely isn't going to rile up online vigilantes who are already hunting for allegedly fake autistic people to harass in the name of supposedly protecting real autistic people, which has not only caused diagnosed high-functioning autistic people to be targeted, but it's led to tidal waves of threats and hate messages being sent to even diagnosed autistic people. People that the NCSA themselves might consider moderately functioning at most, and were just using the internet to try to connect with the outside world. The disconnect between how a lot of these critics of what they think of as high-functioning autism, it really comes down to them looking at black and white profiles of disability and seeing something sympathetic, but then seeing the actual people and seeing that they look even arbitrarily normal, and then deciding that any sense of sympathy borne by those people is now invalid. It's seriously disturbing. And we have that kind of behavior from Jill right here in this podcast.
They had a character who looked just like my daughter. Are you saying my daughter makes autism look horrible? Sorry, why don't you go after my daughter and not Sia if that makes the autism community look horrible.
So the funny thing is, in that last clip, Jill was reacting to a randomly encountered tweet of a low-quality nature, in which describing it as an unrefined hot take from a sophomoric neurodiversity keyboard warrior is probably overly polite. But the tweet had nothing to do with Jill's high support needs autistic daughter. It just seems like evoking her children happens to be one of Jill's default reactions to seeing a message or opinion related to autism that she disagrees with. I'll be covering many more examples of that later. Now, I illustrate this just to make it absolutely clear. I'm not about to make fun of the children of these autism attack parents. I'm making fun of the fact that those parents use the profiles of their own disabled children to discredit the experiences of autistic adults that they have never met. Okay, so now that I've established that, let's start again with this whole sequence from the top.
This was an article that just recently appeared in the time between the lecture in the University of Iowa, which we all got a chuckle out of. And this is from Spectrum News, where physicians, so MDs who've been through medical school, residency training, and all of that, who report that they have autism, speak out against the stigma that they experience in their daily lives. And it just, you just have to step back and ask yourselves, what similarities do they have, for example, with individuals like those on my unit and all the individuals who would meet that profound autism diagnosis? Jenny also had a comment to this article. Again, she was just sort of blown away and had to kind of make a joke that these children are so similar to her son, who had a conversation with his moose costume and then watched the Berenstain Bears before eating his 8th apple of the day.
Warning. The following sequence features flashing lights and thus poses an actual hazard for those at medical risk of harm by strobe effects. Anyone impacted by this hazard or who does not want to see reject Looney Tunes characters having a freak out, please skip ahead 60 seconds following the conclusion of this countdown in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, open the door and let's take a swing at the motherfuckers.
Okay, so Lee and Jenny may not believe an adult with a bachelor's degree of arts and dozens of published written works, like me, could possibly be autistic. And while I may not have a moose costume, if it counts, years ago I paid an artist to paint me as a moose, attending a Christmas-themed rave. I mean, look at me with those holiday lights draped over my antlers. Pretty dope in my opinion. Now, years later, when I attended my first actual rave, there was at least one fellow attendee who did have a moose costume. He was hanging out with a zebra and an antelope, and a robot dragon with a video screen for a face. It was pretty wild. No costume for me though. I just had a strap-on rainbow tail, because they made me get rid of my real tail about 30 weeks before I arrived on this planet. Something about fitting in with all the locals here or something, I don't know. Now, as for the Berenstain Bears, I was more than a fan of the books, but I also caught the TV show whenever it was on, and I'd like to thank my dear late grandmother for having the foresight to tape this random day of cartoons from 1986 which featured it, which was a nostalgic obsession for me even by the early 90s. And I have obviously cared about this tape enough to keep it and continue to rewatch it to this day. And don't even get me started on Thomas the Tank Engine. I have a copy of Stepney the Bluebell Engine signed by Thomas's creator, the Reverend Wilbert Awdry, and I even brought it with me to England when I visited the real-life Bluebell Railway in 2015. Here's a picture of me sitting on the bench at Sheffield Park Station. Wait a second, that's not me. Who the hell is that asshole? Okay, that's better. Yeah, there I am sitting on the bench at Sheffield Park Station. As for the Thomas the Tank Engine toys, I'm a huge fan of the Ertl 90s diecast range. I recently finally added Toby the Tram Engine to my collection. Finally some company from Mavis, my diesel tram locomotive. I could go on all day. Now, Jenny may not consider my ongoing interest in animal dress-up and toys and cartoons made for small children to be valid proof of my autism, but there are plenty of hateful online assholes that would be more than eager to do so. It's kinda sad when online shitheads who fucking hate people like me are more liable to agree with the diagnosis of a team of doctors administered to me more than 30 years ago than an actual doctor who is an associate of the board of directors of an autism advocacy group who also has a position of leadership in a hospital for disabled children. But that reflects the perplexing state of affairs I now find myself in. Jenny isn't here now, so I can only speculate that Jenny would probably find it inappropriate and disrespectful for a so-described high-functioning autistic adult like me to compare themselves to their so-described lower-functioning autistic son, who I never even met, based on our coinciding superficial interests like animal dress-up and kids' cartoons. And if Jenny would in fact agree with that, then so would I. But whether Jenny agrees with that or not, I personally find it inappropriate and disrespectful for her to use her high support needs autistic son's behaviors and interests to invalidate the clinically administered disability diagnoses of autistic adults like me, who Jenny's never fucking met, especially when she insists on describing those adults as children. It would overall be a big step forward for everyone involved or interested if these autism attack parents and autism attack doctors stop hiding behind their high support needs offspring and patients as shields to deflect criticism of their insidiously biased bullshit that they dress up as a defense of real autistic people against disability fakers. Now, of course, I am against people faking disability to seek undeserved benefits and positive attention, but many of these autism attack moms and attack doctors have a definition of faking autism that extends so broadly as to include anyone who can do anything that their own autistic patients and children may never be able to do. And they literally use the successful administration of therapy and services to improve diagnosed autistic people's functionality, to prove that those people must have been faking their support needs requirements from the beginning. But now, it's time to close out this part of barrier aggression, because this is like, what, the 11th video I've done about Autism Confidential, not only including episode 39, but now episode 32, with an otherwise unrelated presentation by Lee where her overseas doctor friend described autistic adult doctors as children and used her autistic son's characteristic profile as a weapon to discredit their pain and suffering. And sadly, it looks like this Lee-Wachtell duology is about to become somewhat of a trilogy within my series. So I'll see you all for part 12 of Barrier Aggression, and thank you very much for watching.